Attention all F1 fans. Once again, the cost cap in Formula 1 is throwing up more controversy. From loopholes to cover-ups, there seems to be a lot more going on around the cost cap than you might think. So let's take a look at the potential for teams to be covering up their expenses in the cost cap. If you're new to F1, you might not have heard about the cost cap in the sport. The cost cap is incredibly new to Formula 1, having only been introduced in 2021, with the cap originally supposed to be introduced in the 2020 season. The original level was at $145 million, and to that point it has been reduced down since. The majority of costs for each team are included, however there are some exceptions. Not included in the cost cap are things like driver salaries, travel costs and marketing budget. The whole idea of the cost cap was to bring the racing field closer together. Prior to the cap, there was a huge difference in spending between the top teams and the teams at the back of the field. The idea was that if all the teams can only spend a maximum similar amount, then the competition will become much closer together. While this has not yet been the case, there is hope that the cost cap can bring the field together in the future. But there has already been a huge amount of controversy around the cost cap. Despite the cost cap only being in the sport for a couple of years, there has already been teams who have overspent. Red Bull are the team to take the headlines in terms of overspending on the cap. No surprise then that they're currently dominating. They were penalised 10% of their wind tunnel time as well as a $7 million fine for an overspend of around $1.6 million in the 2021 season. It added even more controversy to their title win in that season. It seems like the penalty is not really hurting Red Bull at the moment, so makes the overspend completely worth it, I guess. Aston Martin are the other team which we know overspent on the budget cap, but this was a very minor overspend, and Aston Martin were fined nowhere near the same amount as Red Bull. But it shows that there are already some issues with the cost cap, and there could be even more problems moving forward. One problem is interestingly linked to one of the major stories of the Alpine team in 2023. The team sold a 24% share in Alpine Racing to 3 investment groups. Alpine were able to raise £171 million from Maximum Effort Investments, Otro Capital, and Redbird Capital Partners. One of the reasons this hit the headlines was that the investment groups included some big Hollywood names, including Wrexham owners Rob McElhenney and Ryan Reynolds. Michael B. Jordan is now part owner of the Alpine team, which is a pretty strange sentence to say out loud. It seems like just a pretty regular investment deal for a Formula 1 team, but one very vocal former team owner has been pretty critical about the details of the investment. Former Jordan owner Eddie Jordan has been very harsh on the move. The former team principal believes that the valuation of Alpine is completely ridiculous. The deal means that Alpine are valued at around £700 million, which Jordan believes is massively overinflated. In a recent interview, Jordan said, "I won't use the word fake news, but there's absolutely no way from an accounting point of view. Just purely the financial model doesn't stack up. That's number one." He added, "To value something at that level, at a gross value of £700 million, is preposterous. It's ridiculous. What does that then value people like Ferrari or a Mercedes or a Red Bull, for example? That is what I consider to be the value of those teams. And I regret, but with Alpine, it's not even close to that yet." It is incredibly difficult to know how accurate Jordan's suspicions are. We haven't seen a massive sale in the recent past, so it's very difficult to know how much Formula 1 teams would cost at the moment. But £700 million certainly doesn't sound ridiculous, considering the boom in fans that the sport has had over the last few years. However, fudging the numbers has become much more of a concern at the moment, considering the cost cap implications. One of the rumours circulating at the moment is that the lack of evidence Alpine had provided for their valuation figure is down to the team looking for a loophole around the cost cap. The FIA has recently become aware of a suspected loophole in the rules around what teams can spend. The loophole is that teams could be placing personnel and expenses into their non-F1 projects, but still benefiting from knowledge gained from those personnel without it counting to the cost cap. It is a very sneaky approach that would certainly bring some benefits to whichever team wanted to do it. Teams like Mercedes, Ferrari, McLaren and Alpine have extensive car projects outside of Formula 1. they're developing some of the fastest supercars in the world. It's going to be extremely difficult to regulate that, as different teams are happy to move engineering personnel into different departments. For example, James Allison has just returned to the Mercedes F1 team after a stint with Ineos Team UK Britannia's America's Cup team. The cost cap, as an idea, is a very smart one, but the FIA needs to make sure that it is a set hard cap that cannot be manipulated. The issue arises around what teams choose to cover in the cost cap budget. The FIA needs to make sure that teams that have large projects outside of Formula 1 don't seep into the sport. The concern with Alpine is that the large investment the team has gotten will allow Renault to spend more on non-F1 projects, which could lead to the team taking advantage of outside information. It is why the FIA needs to be very strict on exactly what is being covered under the cost cap. If Alpine have a massive jump in performance in the next few months after this deal, there should be suspicions that they're spending above the cost cap, because the extra money will likely have no effect this season. The FIA have recently announced their plans to cut down on the amount of loopholes in the rules around the cost cap. One of the main measures which is included is that the FIA will interview staff who are declared as being part of projects outside of the cost cap to get a better understanding of their work. This helps the FIA ensure that there is no information passing from non-F1 projects into the Formula 1 team. In fact, there are also rumours that the top teams are facing around 100 different questions around their 2022 cost cap figures. That certainly sounds like it's going to prevent any loopholes. One of the other issues that Formula 1 is facing at the moment is that a lot of teams spent hundreds of millions upgrading infrastructure not long before the cost cap came into place. It is then preventing teams like Williams to spend big to get their factory up to the standards of the top teams. In general, there is a lot of issues around the cost cap, and this has bothered some former F1 drivers. Former Formula 1 driver Ralf Schumacher has been particularly frustrated by the cost cap. In a recent interview, Schumacher said, "The topic of the budget cap somehow bothers me more and more." Schumacher even suggested that the sport should consider scrapping the cost cap just a couple of years into the format. He added, "I'm not at all sure whether Formula 1 shouldn't get honest again and dispense with the issue, because it will remain the case that a Haas will probably never be able to raise that much money unless the team is sold to another manufacturer at some point. Formula 1 is the top class of motorsport. I don't know if what they're trying to do there is so good in the long run." It's certainly a good point from the former Jordan and Williams driver. So far, it seems like the cost cap is causing more problems than it is worth. There are so many different issues around the budget cap, with teams constantly looking to bend the rules. F1 teams cannot stop complaining about the cost cap. All of these issues would probably be a lot easier to handle if the cost cap was working as intended. It was supposed to make the grid even more competitive, but at the top of the grid, 2023 has been the least competitive start to the year we've seen in a long time. I still believe that, in the long term, the cost cap is a smart move for Formula 1. If teams are all spending similar amounts, the teams will slowly start to get closer together when it comes to competition on the track. There have been a defined top 3 teams in F1 for the last decade. We're already seeing one of the midfield teams upsetting those top 3, and I do think that is partly down to the cost cap. Red Bull's dominance in 2023 is an issue and not a good sign for how the cost cap is working. But in the long term, the cost cap should still work for the sport. There are just some issues that need to be worked out. But for the cost cap to be successful, the FIA need to make sure to cut down on loopholes as much as possible. If teams continually break the cost cap, it ruins the integrity of the format and will make more and more people consider removing the cost cap entirely. So the FIA cutting out loopholes is crucial to keeping the cost cap in place. But what do you think? Are there more loopholes in the cost cap which teams are going to exploit? Could we see more teams using non-F1 projects as their new cost cap loophole? Why not put your thoughts in the comments down below? While you're down there, why not hit the like button and subscribe? Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.